This is the Week in Sustainability from Sustain.Life. It's where our team of sustainability experts and practitioners share commentary to keep you up to date on developing stories and news.
Hi, I'm Constance Duke, Director of Sustainability at Sustain.Life. This week is, of course, the publication of IPCC's Synthesis Report, which combines the key findings of 6 separate reports within the 6th reporting cycle. So looking at the news coverage, I've come across some fitting descriptors of the dire situation that this report outlines, including a runaway train, a climate time bomb, and the fast lane of the carbon-intensive superhighway. While many news articles close with a message of hope, I think you'll be hard-pressed to find that message in the report itself because it is overshadowed by the devastating facts laid out by climate scientists. So what should you know? Perhaps most importantly, there are nearly 200 references to high confidence in the report, indicating that the probability of climate-related crises occurring as outlined is extremely likely. This report is not a subjective assessment, and the solutions it presents should not be taken as suggestions, but as an urgent call to action, meaning deep, rapid, immediate, and sustained reductions in emissions. So let's dive into some of the key findings. First, the planet has already warmed by 1.1 degrees Celsius or 2 degrees Fahrenheit, with warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius or 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit expected by 2030. If you're thinking most net zero targets aim for 2040 or later, then you've already deduced that this is really bad news. Only 5 years ago, a 2050 net zero target seemed reasonable, but not anymore. So when we get to that level of warming, the expectation and the fear is that we'll reach tipping points with irreversible outcomes. For instance, you can't undo the melting of permafrost and the consequential release of trapped greenhouse gases. In other words, our actions today determine what the world will be like for centuries to come. And to be realistic, we've already crossed some of those thresholds from which we can't recover, like the extinction of hundreds of species, for example. Another important finding was that changes are happening too fast for humans and other species to adapt, which, of course, raises significant public health concerns from things like famine and heat illness and infectious diseases. The report also predicts an increase in mental health issues, both just heat-related mental health issues, but also from trauma following adverse climate events. The report notes that we have a rapidly narrowing window of opportunity for climate-resilient development, and I think it's important to note here that around 3.5 billion people worldwide are highly vulnerable to climate change. So what does that mean for climate action? To no one's surprise, I'm sure, it means stop burning fossil fuels, which cause 75% of global greenhouse gas emissions. More specifically, developed countries should eliminate carbon emissions by 2040 at the latest. So not offsetting, but eliminating fossil fuels, restoring and preserving ecosystems. And on the policy end, it certainly means eliminating fossil fuel subsidies. Carbon capture and storage technology is expected to kind of help stave off catastrophe, but this is in addition to all of us doing our part. Most of those technologies are essentially unproven at scale at this time. And I have to inject here that the recently approved U.S. Arctic drilling project is absolutely counter to everything this report says needs to happen, as is last year's enormous expansion of coal-fired power plants in China. So we obviously still have a long way to go in terms of policy. The report reiterates again that rich nations must take the lead and financially support the transition of developing nations, again, something that we all already knew. And then another interesting finding was that end-use measures can have a huge impact, as much as 40 to 70% of projected 2050 emissions, meaning there are actions that we can take as individuals that will bubble up, including switching to sustainable diets, and we know this means plant-based diets, and minimizing fossil fuel use from things like flying and driving. And then there's climate activism, to drive those policies, as well as corporate action. So we have the knowledge, we have the tools, and examples of successful deployment are kind of all around us, many of which we've covered in previous episodes of the Week in Sustainability. So we need effective public policy at the local, municipal, national, and subnational level, and regulations can force laggards to cut emissions. And of course, whatever we do needs to be done equitably and cooperatively as to not leave vulnerable populations exposed to more hardship. For companies looking for cost-effective solutions, it means efficiency in buildings, transport, and systems, and of course, rapid renewable energy deployment. Again, nothing really new here. But clearly, it also means doing these things at an accelerated pace, aiming to achieve net zero well before 2050, and getting behind climate-friendly policies. A lot of this seems like common sense, I'm sure, given the gravity of the climate emergency. So what are the barriers to adaptation? The report calls out lack of private sector and citizen engagement, as well as lack of political will, low climate literacy, insufficient mobilization of finance, and lack of a sense of urgency. So all of these barriers obviously can be solved. We just don't have a lot of time to solve them. Given that with every bit of additional warming, climate extremes become more widespread. I do recommend giving the report a read and really taking the call to immediate and sustained action to heart. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week for more news in sustainability.
Sustain.Life is a sustainability management SaaS platform with deep carbon expertise that helps future-proof small and medium-sized enterprises by taking climate action. Go to Sustain.Life to learn more. Thanks for listening and watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel or your favorite podcast platform. We'll see you next week.